A veteran bought a spooky cabin for $500. Then his dog found a secret no one dared to open. The August heat pinned the Dragoon Mountains in a glare so bright it erased every mercy. Sarah Hawthorne crouched by the spring, her father cut from stone, listening to the kind of silence that means something is about to step out of it. A pale thread of dust lifted beyond the mesquite, too straight for wind, too slow for cattle. 7 riders appeared one by one, not loud, not hurried, as if they already knew the distance to her door. Their horses were lathered, their rifles hung low, no one smiled. The leader dismounted without a word. He showed empty hands, then spoke her father's name in a pronunciation only a man who had sat at Elias Hawthorne's table would know. Tahoma, he said, and the syllables settled like stones in water. Behind him 6 warriors fanned a half circle, eyes alert, faces calm, waiting for permission that did not come from her. Sarah kept the Colt at her hip and the door at her back. She had seen surveyors lie, sheriffs count, preachers bar. She had never seen strangers behave as if her home were the end of a long map. "We come for a promise," Tahoma said. Blood kept it, time carried it. He did not ask for water, he asked for her hand. Sarah's gaze snagged on a small object tied to his wrist, a silver button nicked and burnished, stamped with the hawthorn leaf her father carved into the cabin lintel. How did he have that? Why now? Why her? The sky seemed to tilt. The spring whispered under her boots like someone speaking through the floorboards. 7 horses breathed. A hawk circled once and vanished behind the ridge. What debt crosses 16 years to knock at one woman's door? What happened next will change everything. The morning after the riders appeared, Sarah rose before first light. The Dragoon peaks a black saw against a paling band. She pulled on Elias's canvas jacket, felt patched elbows, and stepped into warmth. Lifting from hard dirt, she stacked kindling, struck a spark, fed flame in the iron stove, and set coffee to hiss, while smoke climbed the pipe. The cabin he built smelled of pitch and ash. Small windows, braced shutters, iron bars on every latch. A place meant to hold. A home that cannot close cannot keep anything safe, he would say. She packed food, she breathed once. Outside, the garden darkened pale soil with squash, onions and corn. She pinched beetles, tied a trellis with rawhide, and watered from a clay jar, counting heartbeats so she did not give more than roots could hold. At the yard's edge, the spring murmured behind a flat rock, boxed with cedar and covered by a grated lid. She hauled cold water and drank, until her throat eased. The colt rode her hip, its weight set into her stride, a faint clink lifted from the ridge. A horse shifting gear, 7 men among juniper and granite, quiet and patient. With the axe she split knots that mocked her yesterday, sap leaping, resin softening the air. She stacked rounds in a lean-to and measured rows with her boot for airflow because rot creeps without sound. Caleb, her mule, flicked flies and pressed his nose to the rail. She brushed dust from his coat, and checked last week's frayed thong. The new splice held. By mid-morning, the sun hammered the yard until the air shimmered. The mountains looked near enough to touch, knuckled fists rimming her acres. She cleaned the rifle on the bench. Elias built from wagon planks, cloth whispering through the bore while cartridges lined the plank like small suns. Wind and insect rasp were the only sounds. She ate where she could see the wash and both approaches to the cabin. 15 years earlier, fever had taken both parents within a week. She still felt a child's hand, hers gripping a rag while Elias spoke to her mother, a woman who rode west with a book hid in her bodice and a laugh that shook dust from rafter. They taught her to weed, tie knots, read ledgers, and hold a line. After the burial the rooms felt enormous, so she made them fit. Herbs in rafters, quilts from feed sacks, clay pressed into gaps. A flood once turned the spring red. She hauled stones and built a higher wall. Water meant life. Water meant her claim would not be pushed aside by neighbors with more cattle and louder mouths. Hoofbeats drifted from the slope after noon. She stood without haste, palm near the revolver, chin level so she did not grant a sight of retreat. The leader rode at the front, the others fanning behind in a crescent that never aimed muzzles at her door. He lifted his hand, open and empty. "We will camp beyond your fence," he said, shaping English carefully. "We want no quarrel. Our chief sent us to keep an oath. We will not cross your boundary unless asked." His face held the steadiness of stone weathered by the sun. A silver button tied at his wrist flashed. She knew its stamp, Elias cut that hawthorn leaf with a penknife on winter nights. She kept her hand near the steel. Words travel, she said. Forgive me if I do not welcome them without proof. Proof comes with time, he answered. My name is Tahoma. We hunt, mend gear, and sing low so we do not spook your animals. You can watch. He turned his horse and moved away, the others following with soft hooves. They set camp near mesquite where sage broke the wind, far enough that a rifle required care. She watched them unsaddle, rub down horses, and tie lead ropes with loops that would not tangle. One cleaned a pot with sand, another cut meat and another laid stones to hold coals. No shouting, no waste. Discipline showed itself in restraint. She shelved the rifle though her heart kept a drummer's tempo. The day stretched thin as tin. She mended gloves, patched a shirt, and sharpened the axe. Heat pressed against the wall. She took down the ledger Elias kept since the first stake. Ink brown and tidy. Margins recorded weather, visitors, lost tools and a note from the year the fever came. Keep her safe. She traced the words and closed the book as porch boards creaked. Tahoma stood on the lower tread, hat in hand, eyes a respectful distance from the colt. Peace, he said. We will bring no one near your water who is not welcome. We came because old blood asks for care. I will not touch your door. Sarah waited a slow count of 5. Your men can fill 2 skins at dawn and dusk, she said. No more. I will watch. If a muzzle dips into that pool we are finished. He bowed. Understood. When he left the air felt thicker. Trust was not a door she opened for soft speech. It was a hinge oiled by evidence. From the mesquite drifted a low song, a melody rising and falling like wind in a wash. Caleb quit bracing at every flicker and breathed easier. Dusk turned the yard blue. She lit the lamp, warmed beans and ate while cicadas sawed at the door. A memory returned. A winter night when Elias sat by the fire with a stranger wrapped in a blanket. A man whose shoulder bled while snow hissed at the door. Her mother brewed willow bark tea and told Sarah to hold the cup steady. The stranger's gaze held hers, calm despite pain, a steadiness she had seen again today. She had been 7, too young to weigh hospitality, old enough to know fear and goodness can share a table. After washing the plate, she barred the shut. Beyond the fence, coals breathed red in a ring of stones, figures moved in a slow perimeter, and small sounds of camp work drifted like moth wings. Sarah unrolled bedding, set the colt within reach, and lay still. Heat carried cedar and when she finally slid into dreaming, fever took her again, not hers but the memory, a room too bright, a kettle crying, Elias lifting her to the window while her mother whispered that the desert accepts offerings but never death. She woke before dawn with the phrase on her tongue, unsure whether it warned or soothed. She dressed, laced her boots and stepped into the gray light. 2 men walked toward the spring with skins on their shoulders, deliberate, stopping at the fence until she nodded. They filled and waited again until she nodded a second time. Tahoma, at a distance, watched without speaking. Sun broke hard, spilling heat. Sarah holstered the colt and lifted the axe. Her world had not shifted at the surface, yet everything beneath felt changed, like earth after rain, packed but altered, ready to hold footprints she had not planned to see. Whether that change meant safety or ruin remained unanswered, and the answer would arrive with the days-long burn. Dawn thinned over the Dragoon peaks, and Sarah woke to a silence so sharp the stove's iron clicked like a metronome. Beyond her fence, the Apache camp moved with quiet precision. Bedrolls rolled, coals raked, horses watered from skins. Nobody near the cedar lid over her spring. Tahoma spoke to 2 riders and sent them north with bows and snares. The discipline steadied and unsettled her at once. She strapped on the colt, drank from a dipper and worked. She trimmed squash, shook beetles from leaves, tied a failing stock, cleaned her rifle, oiled the carbine, swept grit from the threshold and checked every latch. Caleb nudged for grain she could not spare. She rubbed his star and gave half a scoop anyway. Mercy had to travel both directions or it soured. The heat rose fast, bleaching the sky. At the fence, Tahoma lifted an open hand and kept his boots outside the line. We hunt north, he said. We will not pass your spring. She nodded. I ride to Salvation Pass, she answered. Supplies run thin. He studied the road. Vane's hands drink early, he said. Ride sure. She tightened Caleb's girth and set out. The first miles smelled of creosote and old rain. Yucca speared the sky. Sarah kept a rhythm she could count 10 breaths. Scan edges. Listen for a rattle that did not belong to pebbles. Near Vane's fence, hoofprints wandered like arguments. Glass glinted in the dust. She rode on. Salvation Pass rose from the plain like a weary thought. The church bell promised order. The salon promised forgetting. Between them, businesses leaned together to stay upright. She hitched Caleb high at the mercantile and carried a crate inside. Flour, soap, rope and nails scented the air. Mr. Halpern polished his spectacles and arranged his face into a cautious welcome. "Morning, Miss Hawthorne," he said. "What brings you down?" "Trade and purchase," she replied, laying rabbit pelts, a coil of rawhide, a tin of lard, and 2 jars of quince preserves on the counter. "I need flour, coffee, salt, sugar and lamp oil. Last month's prices stand." She set her ledger where he could see the neat columns. He weighed a jar, nodded toward the back and said, "Oil's dear this week." "Not to me," she answered. And waited. Bootsteps hit the porch. The door swung and a laugh too big for its joke rolled into the store. Amos Vane entered with a dustless hat and gloves without blisters. "Afternoon, Miss Hawthorne," he drawled. "Town says you've taken boarders. 7 of them. Thought you didn't like company." She watched Halpern's pencil, not Vane's grin. "Camped beyond my fence," she said. "They mind their business and their distance." Vane tilted his head. "Danger grows," he murmured. "Sheriff will want a word if trouble takes root. Water draws mischief. I'd be neighborly and take the spring off your hands. Paper proper. Price fair." "Fair to whom?" she asked. "To everyone who has to sleep at night." She let the carbine sling show under her coat. "I sleep," she said. "Sound." Laughter floated from the saloon. 2 of Vane's hands preened in the window. Vane touched the brim of his hat to the room rather than to her and left a promise unspoken. Halpern coughed into his sleeve. "He funds the church roof," he said. "And empties wells he didn't dig," she replied. He shaved a few cents from oil and pushed the scrip across. She loaded flour, sugar, coffee and oil into the crate and walked to the sheriff's office because surrender loves alleys. Sheriff Jonah Reed sat with boots on a chair and a newspaper tented over his face. He straightened when she filled the doorway. "What's needed?" he asked. "A record," she said. "Riders camp near my boundary with my permission to fill 2 skins at dawn and dusk. Vane is spreading fear to loosen my claim. Enter that I asked for protection from forced sale." Reed rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I can write the note," he said. "I can't move men for a camp that hasn't broken a law." "Then write fast," she answered. "Words move slower than rumor." "Don't light a match," he said. "Spooked folks buy bullets." She held his gaze. "Spooked folks also burn women out when law naps." "I'll walk the street," he offered. "That's what I can do." "Do it," she said. Outside, heat crushed sound. She bought oats for Caleb and a spool of thread for mending. At the livery, 2 of Vane's men rolled dice, glancing up too often. A song drifted from the saloon that bent her name into a rhyme with lonely and crazy. She carried herself like a full bucket, balanced steady, not wasting a drop. She lashed the crate, checked knots, and rode out without looking at the windows that collected mockery like dust. The road home ran longer under mid-afternoon glare. A dust devil walked beside her and fell apart. Near the western fence, a bottle burst on a rock, thrown by a rider whose nerve could not cross a property line. She did not turn. Farther on, a braid of smoke lifted from the ridge. Tatona's signal said, "I see you." The day remains ordinary. The valley widened around the cabin like a cupped palm. Relief rose, sharp as thirst. She dismounted and stacked supplies in the pantry with labels and dates because memory lies when hunger talks loudly. She sat at the bench, cleaned the carbine, and opened the ledger to a margin where Elias had written 3 words. Keep her safe. The town had supplied a translation he would never use. Keep her quiet. She refused. Camp sounds drifted over the fence. Whetstone whispered. Leather creak. Horses blowing. A low melody that braided grief with steadiness. A boy braided a rope with patient hands. 2 men dressed a pronghorn with careful gratitude. Tahoma stood apart, eyes on the sky, He did not approach her door. He honored the line as if it were a river. Restraint cut through town noise more cleanly than any speech. Gratitude rose and stood where suspicion had camped. She brewed coffee and sat on the stoop while the sun poured copper over the wash. Coyotes called from the far ridge, air cooled enough for thought. She counted what the day had taught. Vane traded fear like tobacco. Sheriff Reed loved order more than justice. The mercantile bent with the wind that paid its bills. And the only men who had kept their word were the men the town warned her about. Anger lived under her ribs. Yet beneath it ran a thin thread of hope. Not trust, but the outline of it, the way a riverbed sketches a path before rain. Night closed like a lid. Stars punched holes in the heat. 2 sentries traced a figure 8 so nothing remained unseen. Sarah barred the door, lay down with the colt within reach, and slept in short watches. She woke at small noises that meant discipline, not danger. Loneliness paced but did not settle. The map of her life had always been a single line. Tonight a second line ran beside it, close but separate, and the distance between them felt like breath rather than threat. Before dawn she walked to the spring and dipped a cup. Stone, cedar and faint sweetness touched her tongue. Her reflection met her without apology. She spoke to the fierce thing that kept her upright when fever took her parents and rumor tried to finish the job. Have you ever felt alone against the world? Sarah's fight is just beginning. Stay with her. The question hung in cool air like a banner no wind could take. The valley waited, holding its breath for whatever sun would deliver next. She holstered the colt, shouldered the day, and stepped toward whatever came next, unwelcomed by town, unbought by fear and watched from a respectful distance by men who kept their word. Night broke with wind that smelled of wet stone. Before dawn, a squall crawled over the Dragoon peaks, rattled shutters, and hammered the lean-to. Sarah checked the cedar lid over the spring, braced the garden gate, watched lightning on the ridge, and waited. By sunrise, the storm had emptied itself, leaving the valley rinsed and the air soft. She stepped onto the porch, ready for damage. Fence rails stood straight. A new stretch of wire shone along the east run where her splice had sagged. The work bore another hand, knots even, tension true, ends tucked so a mule could not tear hide. The camp near the mesquite moved quietly, smoke lifting in a seam. At her door a cleaned deer rested on willow, belly opened neatly, ribs wiped, legs trussed. A bone bead sat beside the hocks like a mark. She carried the gift to shade. Gratitude did not cancel caution. She salted the cavity, slung the carcass from a joist, and washed until her fingers burned. The colt rode her hip while she cut strips for smoking. From the slope came rhythm, stone on steel, a horse blowing, a low voice for an animal. Distrust shifted a fraction. Mid-morning heat lifted the damp until the dirt seemed to breathe. Sarah walked the fence to read what the storm had written. Over a washout, someone had dragged deadfall into a windbreak and woven brush through gaps. Pride and shame touched the same breath, pride in a yard that looked kept, shame that help had arrived before she asked. 2 men scraped mud from the hooves. One mended a bridle thong. Tahoma studied clouds. He guarded the agreement like a line in water that held. Caleb sulked near the corral, sweat dried in a chalky crust, tail swatting flies. A rag fluttered on the fence post. A hawthorn leaf had been stitched into one corner with rusty thread. Elias carved that shape into the lintel when the first wall went up. She touched the cloth to her mouth, then slid it into her pocket, unsure whether the gesture was a message, a memory, or both. The garden had taken the squall like a box. Corn leaned, onions wore a film of grit, squash blossoms sagged. She tied stalks, brushed soil from shoots, and tamped the bed back into order. Wood clacked, rope hummed, and Caleb cried as a burr worked under a strap. He ripped free of the rail and bolted toward the wash. Sarah ran with hands wide and voice low, yet panic ran faster. The mule pivoted near a thorn patch, hoof tangled, chest heaving. "Hold," she said, too far to matter. Dust lifted from the camp, riders moved, then stopped at her fence. Tahoma came on foot, palms open, no weapon visible. He did not cross until she nodded. Then he stepped through with the care of a surgeon entering a room where breath might break. He stood a few strides from Caleb and began to sing, not loudly, not for her but for the animal whose terror filled the yard. The melody circled one narrow path, patient, repeating. He matched breath to the mule's ragged pull, until ribs slowed. He turned his body to present no threat, edged nearer, kept singing, fingers open. Caleb blinked, ears swiveling. Tahoma set one hand on the neck, eased the rope free, lifted the burr from the strap, and let it fall. The mule trembled, then settled, nose dropping to Sarah's sleeve. Song teaches breath, Tahoma said. Breath teaches the rest. She crouched to examine the scrape. No deep cut, only skin raised and angry. She washed the spot with boiled water, wrapped it with a strip torn from an old shirt and tied a square knot. Caleb leaned against her shoulder with the weight of a child in winter when Elias would pin a quilt tight and say, "The world can rage, our job is to stay." She met Tahoma's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He inclined his head and stepped back over the boundary. Through the day, small mercies kept arriving. Straight branches leaned against the woodpile, cut to nest tightly. A low row of stones redirected runoff from the east wall. By the porch, a coil of rawhide waited, cured smooth, stamped with small marks. Sarah touched each gift, and felt the interior weather change. Distrust did not vanish. It loosened, the way clay loosens after rain. She cooked stew with venison, onion, and a handful of last year's beans. The pot ticked as it cooled. She carried 2 bowls toward the fence, and set one on a flat rock, then stepped back 5 paces. Tahoma approached, removed his hat, and left the bowl where it sat. He met her gaze without demand. "Your song," she said. "I have nothing to trade for it." "You pay with sight," he answered. "You did not mistake help for a chain." He turned and went to his people. Night climbed out of the wash. Sarah sat on the porch with the ledger across her knees and a pencil stub in hand. She wrote in Elias's margin, "Fence mended east run. Deer delivered, branches, rawhide, stones song." Underneath she added, "Kindness also builds walls." She closed the book and watched coals breathe beyond the fence like slow hearts. From the town, the wind carried bitterness that did not belong to the weather. It arrived with wagon dust, words reshaped into weapons. A rider from the livery slowed near her gate and hummed a tune fitted to a slow. In the saloon, she knew without seeing, Amos Vane would be buying rounds, and telling how raiders had camped on a widow's land, how a decent man might have to step in before throats were cut or water poisoned. He would forget whose springs ran dry after paper changed hands, as they often did. He would name himself guardian, and let fear do the rest. Anger rose, then sank under something steadier. The camp held to its discipline. Her place had not been taken, it had been understood. On the far side of the fence, 2 sentries traced a patient figure. She poured coffee and let memory walk. It found a winter when her mother laid a stranger on their table, while Elias stitched a shoulder split by a bullet. The man bled quietly, eyes calm, thanking with a nod when words cost too much air. The wind roared, yet inside, another kind of quiet settled. The kind that comes when danger and care share a room without canceling each other. She had not known until this evening that the same quiet could return. Wind slid along the eaves. Caleb settled. Stars hard. Sarah laid her palm on the doorframe, and spoke to both ghosts at once. "I am watching," she said. "I will choose with both eyes open." Then she set the bar, placed the colt within reach, not because trust had arrived, but because hope had. And hope works best when it does not ask faith to go blind. Outside, the camp's low song threaded the dark steady and human. Inside, the cabin breathed with her, and the valley leaned closer, as if the land itself wanted to see what tomorrow might bring. Morning came hushed and amber. Sarah stepped out with coffee and the colt, while the camp beyond her fence moved in even rhythm. Tahoma stood apart, listening to what the stone kept. When his eyes met hers, he lifted an open hand. She nodded. He crossed the boundary for the first time. He walked slowly, hat against his ribs, rawhide at his wrist, holding a silver button stamped with a hawthorn leaf. He stopped 2 strides from the porch. "You asked for proof," he said. "It waits in your father's trees." They went to the cottonwood that learned to live by bowing. Bark carried a slanted crescent, near a knot like an eye half shut. Elias called it the moon cut. Tahoma set his palm to it and drew out a faded strip of cloth. Ink traced the same crescent. "My father marked this when he bled on your table and lived," he said. "He could not write your letters, so he drew what the tree held. I carry it so the vow does not wash away. Snow, lamplight, iron smell, the winter rose inside her. Sarah felt the wobbling chair under her feet. Her mother's voice low so her hands would not shake. Elias's needle flashing, a stranger's breath had fogged the pain, she had not known his name. Chief Nahuel, she said. Tahoma nodded. Bounty hunters waited in the wash. Your father lifted him from the juniper, barred the door and lay like a shield. Your mother brewed willow bark, cut hair from the wound and sang until his ribs followed the tune. At night your father led him out by the dry arroyo where tracks dissolve. Before he rode, Nahuel swore to guard this water, to speak your claim when mouths turned greedy, and to unite our families if daughter and son agreed. If not, the guard would hold anyway. Sarah traced the scar and felt heat move inside her in a way that was not anger. He never told me, she said. He wanted your choice unforced, Tahoma answered. Time would bring proof or bury it. We came with small proofs first. A fence. A deer. A song for the animal who thought the world had ended. Caleb blew softly near the corral, bandage clean where the rope had burned him. Say the oath as he spoke it, she said. Tahoma's voice lowered. I will keep safe what you kept safe. I will not take water unoffered. I will stand in front of your daughter when trouble hunts her. If she takes my son's hand, our houses will bury anger and build together. If she refuses, the protection remains. The connection felt like a bridge she had not known her life needed. What do you ask of me now? Only that you see what happened. Lies have started their ride. A greedy voice tells the town that raiders circle a widow's door and that a decent man must rescue her spring. When that voice gathers men, we will come forward. We will not wait on permission to keep a promise. Amos Vane, she said. Vane, Tahoma agreed. He wants what lives under your yard more than he wants any neighbor's sleep. Wind combed the cottonwood leaves. My mother said the desert takes offerings but not debts. Sarah murmured. Tahoma touched the butt. Your father carved this stamp in winter, he said. My aunt remembers him laughing at the first crooked leaf. She stitched a hawthorn on a rag and tucked it into your fence to ask permission for the story. Sarah smoothed the rag, then folded it like a letter whose answer would take days. I stood alone so long that company feels like trespass, she said. Still, the fence looked truer than I could have made it, and the rawhide by the porch saved me a day I did not have. Kindness leaves room, Tahoma said. We will keep leaving room. They walked the yard. He did not touch what she had not invited him to touch. By the garden he pointed to a hairline crack in the cedar box around the spring. When the mud dries, it will widen, he said. We can true the seam with pitch and heartwood. We can, she answered. He inclined his head, set his hat, and stepped back over the boundary. The camp resumed its rhythm, quiet talk, a whetstone's hush, a horse blowing. On the ridge, a hawk turned once and slid into a thermal. Sarah opened the ledger. Besides Elias's keeping her safe, she wrote. Moon cut matched, cloth carried, oath spoken, choice unpressed. She let her shoulders drop for the first time since the riders appeared. From the town, rumors would be rising. Vane's men would drink courage and sharpen a rescue that meant take. Sheriff Jonah Reed would say the law requires a crime before it gets out of its chair. None of that changed this tree, this scar, this button looped to a wrist that had not reached for her lap. None of it changed the coffee she had carried to her father when she was 7, the steam on the window, the stranger choosing life because a song would not let him drop. A tremor came then, not fear, more an opening. She let it move through. She looked at the wire singing tight in the wind and knew help had arrived that did not cost her name. She could honor it without surrender. She could refuse the marriage and keep the guard. She could accept and build a bridge sturdy as the cottonwood's grip. Either way, her father's courage no longer hid in her chest. It stood beside her. She went to the spring, and knelt. Water flashed, clear after storm and rumor. She drank until the desert eased its claim. On the surface, she saw a woman lean from work, eyes steady despite a new understanding. She saw a house built to keep danger out, and a promise asking to be let in. She saw too the shadow of men who would soon ride this way with slogans for spurs. She rose and touched the lintel where the hawthorn seal lived. The groove felt deep, as if years had been carving it while she slept. I hear it, she said. I won't be hurried. Across the boundary, Tahoma lifted 2 fingers in acknowledgement and returned to his people, Light climbed. A coyote trotted the wash, nose to ground, unconcerned with vows. Heat settled on her shoulders with the weight of a decision. It did not crush, it clarified. The past had stepped into noon. The valley waited, steady and watchful. She dried her hands and counted what would be needed if trouble arrived by sundown. Stacked wood, filled canteen, spare rounds, a plan to bring Caleb into the lean-to before the first shot. She also counted what she had never allowed on lists. Help within call, an ally whose proof was bark and song, and a scar that matched. At the threshold, she paused and spoke the question that had been forming since the cottonwood gave up its story. What would you do if your past redefined your future? Sarah's choice is coming. The day turned brittle. When Sarah traced hoof sign along the road from Salvation Pass, shod prints overlapped. Some wide from frayed animals, others narrow and fast. All pointed toward her valley. She crouched in mesquite shade and felt heat bleeding through her palm into the sand. On the ridge the Apache camp lifted a thin smoke thread. Tahoma stood against the sky, passed a spyglass to a younger scout, accepted it back, and nodded once. News worse than rumor had crossed stone. She sealed the cedar lid over the spring, dropped the iron hasp, and tied Caleb in the lean-to where fly smoke dulled the biting cloud. Ammunition lay in rows on the bench. She checked the carbine, worked the action, oiled the bolt and set canteens by the bed. Totona approached the fence. Riders left town, he said. Vain pays them to look like courage. They carry bottles and fear. They will try to make your fear larger than theirs. How many? 12, maybe more by dusk. They travel loudly believing noise can do work. We will shape the quiet into a wall. Sheriff Reed, talking, not riding, he said. Men like Vane do not wait for weather. He pointed at the draw west of the cabin where barrel cactus freckled the slope. We sit there and there, he said, tracing angles. Our rifles will not speak first. When dust reaches your gate, bar the shutters. Do not step out unless you hear the whistle, which means safe. I won't abandon the spring. You protect it by living to claim it. We keep the road honest. The young scout jogged down with a bent brass star in his palm. They wear tokens to call theft righteous. Tahoma murmured. She slipped her ledger, the Hawthorne stamped button, and her mother's scarf into a sack, contingency not surrender, and walked the fence. East wire sang, west posts held. The gate swung true. Wind carried another scent, cheap whiskey and lamp oil riding high in the heat. Dust lifted where the road crests a saddle. A hat showed, then another, then wobbled barrels. Voices traveled ahead of bodies, a bragging chant, trying to outrun doubt. Amos Vane's bay gelding stepped from the haze as if the animal had no say. The rancher rode straight, jaw set, coat too clean for work. 2 livery men flanked him, one caressing a new belt buckle as if shine could grant authority. Sarah retreated to the porch. Tahoma lifted 2 fingers. She nodded, slipped inside and dropped the bar. Cabin coolness settled like a hand on her neck. She raised a shutter a finger's width and watched. Vane halted beyond rifle reach. Miss Hawthorne, he called. You're keeping dangerous company. I fetched help. Totona's silhouettes dotted the stone at the slope breaks. Come out, Vane shouted. We'll escort you to town so decent folks can settle this. Papers are ready. You sign, you sleep. Otherwise the law will intervene. She slid cartridges into loops on the wall and kept the muzzle low. Outside a bottle arced and burst against a boulder, a test meant to draw a twitch. The Apache line did not flinch. Laughter followed, thin and mean. She's got savages in her yard, a rider jeered. Bet they're pickin' bones from her stew. Heat crawled up Sarah's throat, then settled where decisions use it. She breathed in 4 counts, out for 4 more, and found Caleb through the plank seam. The mule stilled. Vane raised his hand like a conductor. Last ask, he called. Open your door. We'll be neighborly. Water's too important to leave to a girl with a pistol and a story. Hooves rolled like thunder. The posse drifted wider, searching angles. Tahoma whistled once, short, cutting. His line flexed, then settled. Back to the road, he called, voice calm. Turn your animals and ride away. We are not your problem unless you insist on making us your problem. Listen to that, Vane told his men. Raiders learned manners. He nudged the bay 3 paces forward. This land isn't yours, he shouted. It belongs to the smart and the strong. Then you should fear it, Sarah answered. A flank rider tested the fence with his stirrup. Wire bit leather, he cursed. Two others edged toward the draw, sure they'd found a blind corner. From the rocks a hawk lifted. A flash like a signal flash. Rifles settled into shoulders, muzzles steady as breath. Vane pulled a folded paper from his coat and shook it. "G'd ready," he sang. "Signature buys peace. Folks in town will clap." "In town they repeat your lines," Sarah whispered. "Here the ground tells the truth." Another bottle sailed. It shattered near the spring house and spread oil in a slick fan. Fumes pushed back into riders' faces. Horses tossed and sidestepped. "Bad idea," someone coughed. Vane laughed, thinner now. "You see," he shouted. "They're threatening a lady in her home. Witnesses everywhere." Sarah touched the hawthorn seal above the door, felt warmth under her palm as if the wood remembered a winter oath. She lifted the carbine and marked a knothole beyond Vane's stirrup. The place she would use if steel had to On the ridge bedrolls were folded, coals buried, ropes ready to release. Men checked sights, wrapped stocks with rawhide, tied hair tight, and painted quiet lines across cheekbones for remembrance. Wind dragged Vane's words into tatters. He spread his arms. "Boys," he said, "make ready." The posse eased carbines from scabbards and slid hammers back with metallic insects of sound. One man fumbled and dropped a round into dust. Another snickered to hide a flinch. Totona's voice crossed stone like water. "No one touches the spring," he said. "No one crosses the fence. Turn now, and the road forgets you." A rider near the mesquite spat and spurred, angling to test the draw. Two of Tahoma's men ghosted forward a pace, then stilled. Their shadows fit the rock. Caleb stamped once. Sarah murmured the pattern. Tahoma taught. 4 in, 4 out. The mule pressed his nose to the wood and quieted. She slid another cartridge into the side gate and let the bolt ride forward. From the south, another dust plume bled into the sky, latecomers or drifters drawn by spectacle. If Reed moved at all he would arrive after the count. Vane lifted his paper higher, banner snapping in the wind. "This is Mercy," he declared. "Sign, and be safe." Mercy would be a sheriff on a horse and a neighbor who minded his own business. What Vane offered smelled like lamp oil and a hush fell, the kind that arrives before rivers jump banks or roofs lift. Tahoma raised an arm. Every rifle paused at the same angle. He whistled long and descending. A note she hadn't heard until now. It ran along the ridge, slid through a cotillo, brushed the eaves and drew a line across the day. She understood, the next sound would crack the world into before and after. She set her jaw, palmed the button in her pocket, and fixed her sight on that knot while the valley held its breath and the road waited to learn who owned it. Noise or quiet, greed or promise. The whistle fell through the canyon, and the valley held its breath. Vane spurred his bay, and the posse lurched forward with whoops that sounded like fear pretending to be courage. A pistol cracked near the cedar lid. Grit sprayed Sarah's cheek. She planted the carbine on the sill, breathed 4 counts, let a rider who tried to blur himself with speed, and squeezed. The bullet kissed the stone ahead of his horse. The animal checked so hard the man pitched into dust and rolled toward the road on his elbows. On the ridge, Tahoma rose and his men unfolded behind the rock in one fluid hinge. 2 measured shots stitched dust along the fence, warnings as precise as clockwork. The posse answered with wildfire that struck everything except intent. A slug chewed the door frame, splinters stung Sarah's face. She slid to a second slit and kept breathing. Caleb hammered the stall once. "Easy," she said, eyes on the yard. A rider lifted a lariat toward the spring house. She clipped the rope near the loop and watched it collapse like a cut snake. "Push them," Vane shouted. He waved a folded paper like a priest with a fragile cross. A bullet from the rocks shaved its corner, the paper vanished back into his coat. Thunder that belonged to rifles rolled in even beats. One Apache shot cut a rein and sent a horse bolting wide of the water. Another ripped splinters from a wagon tongue and turned a charge into clatter. 3 of Vane's hands slid into the south gully and found Tahoma already measuring the angle. He vaulted a boulder, dropped to a knee and fired twice. One hat leapt into the blue and never returned. Another man's pistol sprang from his fingers and skittered down the slope. The third lay flat and studied the dirt as if it might forgive him. Sarah's breath settled into the pattern. Elias taught her, 4 in, 4 out. She cut leather when she could, metal when she must, and any angle that threatened the cedar lid the instant it appeared. A lantern arced toward the porch. She tracked it and clipped the glass mid-air. Oil flashed to vapor instead of flame. The thrower stared at his empty hand, as if daylight had robbed him. "Hold," Tahoma called, voice calm enough to shame chaos. He stepped into view to draw fire and traded their noise for time. He shot a boot heel and made a man dance. He clipped a rear sight and left a rifle blind. Dust quivered. Heat trembled. The ridge spoke a language the posse did not know. 2 riders spun for the road. Another worried about a fence staple with a knife. Sarah broke the blade with a single shot, and watched the man forget how to breathe. "Home," she said through the crack. He went. Vane rammed the bay up the middle, firing left and right, both shots wide as gossip. "You're surrounded," he yelled. A round from Tahoma trimmed a curl from his hatband. He flinched and hauled the gelding back 2 lengths as if yanked by a rope. A kid on a dun decided to be notable and drove straight for the porch, eyes bright with borrowed courage. Sarah hit his bridle. The pony skidded, and planted. Dust stitched a line at the boy's boots from the flank, low and merciful. He blinked at the sky, dropped his pistol and ran, sobbing at the sound of his own feet. "Pull out," someone cried. "They ain't human." The shout bent into a Sarah cut a second lariat, reaching for the spring. The rope fell harmlessly. The cabin seemed to breathe with her. The hawthorn carved above the door warmed against her shoulder as if the wood remembered winter oaths. Vows aren't paper, she thought. Their hands steady in a storm. 3 crisp shots stepped down the ridge. The gully team dissolved. A hat flew. A rifle broke. A man sat and stared at blood on his sleeve like it had chosen the wrong arm. Vane fought the truth. "Reed will hang them," he yelled. "Stand and fight." He jerked the reins. The bay threw foam and flattened ears. The animal had opinions about leadership. Another bottle whistled and burst on the rock behind the lean-to. Caleb reared and crashed down. "With me," she said softly, sliding the stall latch and pressing her shoulder to his until his tremor turned to weight. The push collapsed. One hand dropped his gun and ran with fingers spread, as though swimming through heat. 2 more fled for the saddle ridge in a jangling knot. Others followed. A spill of elbows and curses. Tahoma whistled them off rather than chase, saving air for the one man who would not yield. Amos Vane stayed as if pride had nailed his boot soles to the ground. He circled once, twice, and chose a straight line at the porch the way fools choose cliffs. Sarah stepped into the doorway, carbine steady, heart quiet, feet set the way Elias had taught her to brace when a plow bit hard. Tahoma walked down from the rocks with a deliberate ease that stretched the space between seconds. Vane hauled the bay to a halt 10 paces out. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "The county will come. The papers will say I tried to save you." "The county can read holes," she answered. "It can count them at my door." He grabbed at his holster. Tahoma fired once. The bullet shattered the revolver's cylinder. Metal leapt like coins. Vane cried out, clutching blood that ran bright across his palm. "Murder," he gasped. "You're breathing, Tahoma. That's more mercy than you brought." Quiet fell so hard. Sarah could hear cicadas sawing heat into strips. Vane glared at the ridge, then at her. "You don't even know what you're choosing. They'll turn when the wind does." She raised her voice until it reached the stone. "I do know," she said. "Tahoma is my future husband." The words hung like a banner the wind could not tear. A murmur moved along the ridge and settled into grounded hush. Tahoma did not smile. He bowed his head once, acknowledgement as clean as water. Vane backed the bay, rage scattering his senses. He spat into the dust, wheeled and bolted for the road, hat listing, hand dripping red. The remnants of his posse straggled after him, a rope of frightened silhouettes losing shape in their own dust. Sarah lowered the carbine, and the world returned. Sharp ridge, garden, cedar lid, the spring's lip holding a bright film like a coin in a palm. She crossed to the fence. Tahoma waited a step beyond the boundary as he always had. She stepped over to him. "Thank you," she said. "We kept a promise," he replied. She looked at the valley, its face lifted as if listening. A wind slid through a cotillo and felt older than anger. She understood why Elias had lied for a bleeding stranger and opened their door to danger. Some doors try to own you if you bar them against what is right. She tied the hawthorn button to her vest, and felt the knot settle like a seal. When the world turns against you, who stands by your side? Sarah's answer is clear: keep listening. Her voice carried in the cooling air as if the canyon itself had asked the question and approved the reply. The ridge exhaled. Men gathered what remained of their pride, and moved toward a night that would force them to edit the story they told themselves. Sarah touched the cedar lid, felt the spring breathe, and knew the valley would remember. Quiet had held, quiet would hold. For the first time since fever took her parents, the ground beneath her boots felt shared rather than borrowed. Dust settled over the wash in slow veils while echoes died against the ridges. Tahoma's scouts swept the slope, gathering cartridges and checking sightlines before anyone exhaled. Sarah lowered her carbine and touched the cedar lid, hearing the spring whisper as if water had held its breath. Amos Vane sat his bay awkwardly, hand bound in a torn kerchief, pride leaking through pain. Without a crowd he looked smaller. Tahoma walked from the rocks with his rifle slung and his hands open. "No one dies here today," he said, stopping a few paces from the rancher. "Drop the pistol, set your cartridges down, and ride to town. Tell them the spring is guarded by an oath older than your paper." Vane sneered. "The county will come. The county can count," Tahoma answered. He cut the revolver free, emptied the belt into a sack, drew the rifle from the scabbard, cleared the chamber and laid the useless weight across the saddle. "Keep your horse and your blood," he said. "Carry a warning." Vane yanked the reins and galloped toward Salvation Pass, dust swallowing his hat brim. Silence returned in layers, wind sweeping the road, cicadas resuming rhythm, Caleb breathing easy in the lean-to, the ridge settling like a chest after a cough. Sarah crossed the fence and met Tahoma where dust had not yet fallen. "Anyone badly hurt?" "A shoulder groove and a twisted ankle," he said. "Bring them to the stoop," she replied. "Water first, then cloth." Men came without swagger, hats in hands, eyes steady. She boiled a kettle, set carbolic and linen on a board, and worked with quiet precision. She cleaned the shallow wound, tied a neat flat knot, wrapped the ankle with steady tension, braced it with a shaved broom slat, and handed each man a dipper before he returned to watch. No one spoke above a murmur. Tahoma stayed outside the line of shade, eyes on the road. "He will turn that ride into a sermon," he said. "The town listens when a man buys whiskey for the room." "Let them listen," Sarah replied. "The sheriff will also hear what your hands did not do." They lifted a leaning post together, reset a staple, and reed the wire for strain. Work steadied everything. Caleb nosed her sleeve and accepted a palm of grain saved for hard days. Late light slid along the ridge. Riders appeared at the bend, Sheriff Jonah Reed and 2 deputies, cautious, scanning for smoke that did not exist. Reed halted at the intact gate and the quiet camp. "Miss Hawthorne," he said. "Are you harmed?" "I'm safe," she answered. "Your friend rode away after I watched his weapons become scrap." He studied the shattered cylinder in Tahoma's palm and frowned at the lack of chaos. "I heard talk of flames and a hostage," he admitted. "I see clean stones, patched scars, and men treating wounds they did not make." "Write that," Sarah said. "Write that the attempt failed, the spring remains mine, and protection promised long ago stands here." Reed nodded. "I'll file it," he said. "Vane will storm my office." I'll point him toward the road he fled. Not fear but recognition moved across his face. He saw order where rumor had painted threat. "I can escort you to town," he offered. "Here is where walls matter," she replied. "We have what we need." The deputies turned their horses, puzzled by a peace they had not imagined. Evening laid copper on the wash. Smells of stew, leather and dust mingled with creosote. Sarah cleaned instruments, rinsed the cloth and hung strips on a line. She left bread heels and a crock of pickled onions on a flat rock at the fence. Tahoma set 2 mesquite blocks by her woodpile in return. No speeches, only a trade that tasted like neighbors. She opened the ledger and wrote, "Weapons stripped, intruders dismissed, sheriff recorded, water defended, alliance visible." She listened to Whetstone Hush, Saddle Creek and a low song that matched the fading light. Then added, "Fear shrank, promise stood." Night rose gently, stars punched through the heat. The valley no longer felt like a fort pressed hard against its edges. It felt watchful and alive. She checked bandages and found gauze clean, eyes bright, tempers even. One warrior touched the knot at his shoulder and nodded. "Your hands keep pain from growing," he said. "Your men kept fire from finding me," she answered. Tahoma approached but did not step on the porch. He lifted the silver button, hawthorn seal glinting in starlight, and tied it to a fresh thong. "Your father's winter lives," he said. "Tomorrow we finish the seam in the cedar box. Pitch, heartwood, patience." "I'll heat the kettle," she replied. In the lean-to, Caleb chewed and sighed the way a child sleeps after a hard day. A draft slid down from the peaks. Wind carried town scent, coal smoke, stale beer, arguments cooling on steps. Yet no hoofbeats followed. Vane's influence had cracked. Not with a shout, but with a day that refused his script. Merchants would still sell him rope and gamblers would still offer a chair. Yet people who measured wealth by wells would glance toward this valley with new respect. Sarah looked across acres that had served as school, refuge, and cage. Tonight they felt like home again. She touched the lintel, then her own pulse matching rhythm to wood and water. "We will teach the valley a steadier song," she said. "It already listens," Tahoma replied. Before sleep she walked to the cottonwood. Leaves whispered above the moon cut where the cloth had slept through years of weather. She laid 2 fingers on the scar and thanked the man who had bled there. The man who had kept that story whole, and the parents who risked everything. Then she barred the door with hands that did not shake. Morning brought work, not dread. Men warmed pitch until it ran like honey and pressed it into the hairline crack, while she steadied the cedar box. Smoke lifted in pale ribbons. Birds argued in the mesquite. When the seam held, she trimmed the excess and rubbed the joint smooth. Water chimed against wood and smelled like new rain. "We stand with you," Tahoma said. "Word will walk ahead of us now." "Let it walk straight," she replied. By midday the camp was packed light. 3 riders circled out to watch the road. Others coiled rope, checked cinches and doused coals, leaving ash a gust could erase. Protection did not need spectacle. It needed steadiness and reach. Before they moved to the ridge, Sarah carried a basket to the boundary, bread, dried apples and 2 jars of quince preserves, saved since spring. "For the trail," she said. "For the seam," Tahoma answered, accepting the weight as if it were a vow. "If Vane returns with talk louder than sense, we will arrive first." She smiled. Not from victory but from relief earned by honest hours. The valley breathed. The mountains watched and the spring held clear, bright and clean. She felt the past settle and the future open like a gate on well-oiled hinges. Honor and courage can change everything. "Do you agree?" Share Sarah's story. The valley woke gently and clean. Sarah stepped onto the stoop with a tin cup, tasted water bright as a coin, and felt the old ache of solitude loosen. Habit had been her armor. Counting shells, mending seams, guarding a spring as if vigilance were kin. Yesterday proved a different arithmetic. Quiet held. The fence stood straight, the cedar seam shone. Songs drifted from mesquite, where fear once slept. Steadiness kept watch. She thought of Elias's scrawl, "Keep her safe," and under it wrote a new line she had earned. "Build together." Tahoma crossed the yard with his hat against his ribs, and the hawthorn button bright on a rawhide thong. He stopped at the boundary he had honored since the first hour. The line that had felt like a wall now looked like a threshold. He asked one plain question. Voice steady as creekstone. Would she join her life to his? Not as surrender or rescue, but as a bridge between her cabin and his people. No parade, no bargains, no counting of enemies, only verbs a life can keep, and work they could share under sun and moon. She said yes because these men moved through danger without letting cruelty teach their hands. Cruelty. She said yes because the seam would hold when heat returned, because the moon-cut scar in cottonwood had carried a promise longer than rumor. She said yes because her parents had chosen risk over comfort, and the desert had remembered. The word landed like water at noon, clean, sufficient, exact. Love did not arrive dressed as a spectacle. It came as a steadier It asked for courage that does chores, patience that keeps watch, and hope that does not borrow trouble. They agreed to bind themselves at sundown in the yard where the wind could witness. No preacher, no ledger. Their vows would be real work in the future tense. Mend, shelter, listen, carry, plant, forgive, learn, return. Tahoma's aunt braided a circlet and tucked 3 hawthorn leaves beneath a quartz chip on the rail. A stew simmered. Bread rose under a cloth. A single rope stretched between posts for ribbons of cloth that flickered like prayer. Scouts rode the ridge, and returned with the same news. No dust, no riders, only a sky cooling toward iron, and a valley learning a new calm. Evening turned the mountains iron blue. Sarah stepped out in her mother's woven skirt, and a clean blouse, hair braided and pinned with the tiny bone bead left beside the deer. Tahoma waited in a sash dyed with plant color. The desert keeps hidden until rain. They met at the boundary, arms open, foreheads almost touching, neither claiming the first step. The camp stood back, respectful and glad. Doves lifted and settled. Coyotes called far off, curious, not hungry. The moment felt like a door that had been knocking for years, and finally swung on oiled hinges. They spoke softly and built their promise like careful carpenters. He vowed to treat her spring as sovereign, to stand between her and hunger, to call her by her full name when storms pinned the roof, to offer counsel without taking her hands from work she already did well. She vowed to guard his rest when wounds ached, to leave room for his songs, to keep the cedar seam as shared duty, to welcome his kin as neighbors. When the circlet settled, the yard breathed. Coyotes called far off, curious rather than hungry, and even the wind sounded relieved. They ate bread torn by clean hands, venison stew that tasted of smoke, onions quick pickled so tartness could sing, and dried apples that remembered shade. A young rider from yesterday's gully hat crushed flat, eyes clear, stepped to the fence and asked if the spring would accept an apology poured like water. Sarah told him to drink, then keep that lesson by his own well. He wept once and rode. Night unrolled, stars cut windows in the dark. She stood with Tahoma and looked across acres that had schooled her in endurance and thrift, and now at last in trust. Morning brought work, as good days do. They walked the garden and straightened corn, laced new twine for beans, checked squash blossoms where bees slept like corn. They shaved a sliver from a gatepost so the latch would seat sweetly. They spoke of names for children and how to braid languages, so both houses could hear themselves across a table. She imagined a small hand finding the hawthorn carved into the lintel and asking why a leaf lived in the wood. She would answer that a winter vow had waited under bark through storms until courage came back to claim it. Sheriff Reed rode by near noon, counted unbroken boards, considered the quiet camp, and touched his brim to bow. Reports would be filed, complaints would be aired. Yet the road to this valley would remember the sound of men who came to seize and left with dust in their mouths. Vane's money might clink a while, but his voice would ring hollow where wells give people their lives. A different story had rooted, and the wind would carry the seed to other yards. Sarah pressed her fingers to the moon cut, and thanked the stranger whose blood had stained winter boards, and the parents who had wagered mercy. She promised to keep memory honest, not pageant, not grievance list, not fable that turns enemies into cartoons, rather, a ledger that remembers costs, credits what is due and stays open to deposits of grace. She faced Tahoma at the stoop with both palms open. "My house remains my house," she said. "My life opens to yours." He touched his forehead to her knuckles, a gesture that landed like truth. Caleb blew a friendly breath. A hawk tilted its wings and climbed into clean blue. Somewhere, talk would wander and wear itself thin. Here, work waited, love steadied, and water kept its silver voice. If you have carried a bucket through heat while doubt heckled from the fence line, if you have barred a door because pain taught you that quiet means safety, if you have wondered whether an oath made in a hard season can outlast slander, let this be a help can meet you without stealing your name. Patience can win where noise fails. Honor can bend two houses toward each other until a bridge replaces a ditch. Courage is not the shout, it is the hand that keeps working when fear rattles its tin. Take this small steady map with you into tomorrow. Always. Sarah's story proves that courage can rewrite your destiny. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more epic tales of the frontier.